Bernabe Orphanage in Guatemala. I had the joy of going on a mission trip to Casa Bernabe several years ago with my granddaughter Alexis, and Jill and her husband Mike were the trip leaders, and we had just an awesome time. In fact, that song, Beautiful Things, you remember, Jill, we did a New Year's Eve program and a skit that had that song as the backup to it, so that has great meaning for me when I hear that song. It takes me right back there to Casa Bernabe. Jill and her husband Mike have a great family. You'll meet their daughter Dayna in a little bit. But Jill is just a woman with a heart as big as the size of Texas, and loves on these little orphans. In fact, each table has a few pictures around the centerpieces of children who are available for sponsorships at Casa Bernabe, so she's going to tell you more about that. But please give your full attention to Jill as she talks about her own journey with Christ and how he has led her to be such an instrumental person in terms of the lives of these little people and the gift of God's grace coming to them through her ministry of love and working with these children whose lives have been broken through various circumstances and bringing that tremendous gift of the hope of Jesus Christ and his love to them. So please warmly welcome with me, Jill Luber.
As Kim was talking, it's really interesting because our family moved here in 2005, and I heard about what had happened, and I prayed for you before we knew you. It's really a privilege here to share these stories with you, and like everyone's been saying, they're God's stories. This is an honor, so I'm going to just kind of take off where Kim left off a little bit. I'm going to tell you about this sweet girl, Isel. When Kim started sponsoring Isel in October of 2013, I was really, really happy. I run the sponsorship program at Casa Bernabe Orphanage, and I have really prayed for a special family for Isel. Isel was full of joy. She would come running up every time I saw her with a huge smile and a big hug. Just a really, really beautiful girl. I didn't know her backstory. I know a lot of the kids' backstories, but I didn't know what brought her to Casa Bernabe in the first place. One day when I was doing sponsor cards with the kids, I did receive these beautiful painted gospel songs from Kim and her family, and I did have the privilege of going through them with her one by one. She knew the gospel, and it was so precious because as soon as she was done, she had this precious bag with her, and little girls were running up to her right and left, saying, "What do you have? What do you have?" And she shared the gospel with them, and it was beautiful. A child received the gospel, and the child shared the gospel. One day in 2015, I got a call from our social worker saying that Isel had gone back to live with her grandma. I asked a lot of questions, and we found out it was a really good situation. Grandma was a Christian woman. She was going to a good home. Our social workers had interviewed, and they'd been to her home. Isel was super happy about it, and they even sent me a picture of her with her grandma with a really big smile on her face. So I'm going to fast forward now to May 8th of this year. I was actually in Disneyland with all of our family when I was contacted about this horrific fire that was happening at a government-run orphanage. The orphanage was supposed to house 400 children, but there were over 800 children in there with no records. 52 young women had been put into a classroom as punishment for running away. These girls, we found out as the story unfolded, had been continually raped and abused by the guards. They were prostituted out, they were mistreated, they weren't given much food. They felt they had no voice, and so to get the attention of the public, these girls ran away under the cover of darkness. The next morning, 52 of them were caught and placed in a classroom back at this orphanage. As the morning wore on, some of the girls asked to be let out to go use the bathrooms, but the guards said no. They had thrown mattresses in the room for the girls to sleep on, so the girls made cause for privacy. As the morning went on, one of the girls had the idea to light one of the mattresses on fire, thinking that if there was smoke, the guards would let them know. But the key to the classroom was guarded. No one released them. As smoke started billowing out of this classroom, policemen were handing in bags of water through the windows. When the door was eventually unlocked, the girls stumbled out, hair, bodies, clothes on fire. 19 young women died on the scene that day. 21 more died later in area hospitals. As I cried that day at Disney, I found out that Lisa was one of those girls that had died at the scene. We don't know how she ended up at that home. Last we knew she was with her grandma. Maybe grandma died and somebody placed her there. We still don't know what happened to this day. But as I grieved for our sweet Isela and I called Kim, I remembered the gift that she and her family had given Isela of those gospel songs. And I like to think that that day she prayed with those other young women that were in that room with her and told them about Jesus. I know we're going to see Isela again. The children I work with in Guatemala have had very hard lives. 3 boys, 3 brothers, ages 3, 4, and 7, whose father and mother were gunned down in front of them in their home. A beautiful 8-year-old girl who was sexually abused by her stepfather because he decided he wanted another wife. A family of 4 siblings, the oldest girl covered over her whole body with human bite marks, scarred for life internally and externally. A 3-year-old girl whose twin was shot dead right next to her because a drug dealer didn't get what he wanted from her father. A 6-year-old boy abandoned by his mother who never returned for him. A 21-year-old girl who hates to celebrate her birthday because it represents the day that her father was shot on the street in front of her. A 12-year-old girl impregnated by her father. An 8-year-old boy who came to us spitting and kicking at any man who came within 10 feet of him because of the rape that he had endured by another man. It's hard. These kids have had more trauma in their young lives than many of us can imagine. But at Casa Bernabé, we share Jesus with them. We work through their trauma alongside of them, and we give them hope. If I can, I'd like to share a little bit about my story with you as well. It's a hard story too, but it's a story of beauty from ashes, and it's God's story. Just like the children I work with in Guatemala, I had a very hard childhood. My father was an alcoholic. There were many days that my dad didn't come home. Many days my mom didn't know where she would get money to buy food or pay the electric bill. Sometimes my dad left us for extended periods of time. There were times when I was very afraid of my dad. There were times when I prayed, even though I didn't know Jesus at the time, that my dad's life would be taken before he could hurt another. There were times when I hated my dad. When my dad wasn't drinking, though, I loved him. His drinking was cyclical. It's really hard to explain this to people who haven't lived through this, but my dad taught me many things. He gave me love for nature. He taught me how to bond wet sand and paint my first car. He taught me how to be creative and use my hands. He taught me as a woman I could do anything I wanted. He could be very gentle, kind, and good. I also loved my dad. When I was about 10 years old, my father's best friend began abusing me sexually. My best friend's father began abusing me sexually. They lived across the street from us. The man threatened me with my family, and as a young girl, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I avoided going to her house, or I would only go when he was not there. But somehow he always came home, and it continued, and I held that secret close, afraid to tell anybody what was happening to me. One day at school then, I was called into the principal's office, and the police were there waiting for me, for apparently this man had done the same thing to 3 other neighborhood girls. The police, the girls, and parents all met at our house. We were all separated from each other, and we took turns being interrogated by an officer. It was a male officer. When it was my turn, I couldn't say what happened to me. I was embarrassed. I didn't know the right terms. I didn't have the words to describe what he had done to me. There was a man sitting in front of me threats still hanging over my head. I don't know, but I had no voice. And the other girls couldn't speak either, and this man went free. No one advocated for me or stood up for me, and I didn't know how to advocate for myself, and so I lived in shame. And as we learn when we work with kids from sexual abuse cases, many of these young people become sexually promiscuous due to the fact that their bodies were awakened to things that should only have happened in the marriage bed. This is common, and it was no different with me. As a teen, I drank, I smoked cigarettes and marijuana. I had friends who were into parties. Somehow, and I know now that it was God, I was protected throughout this time. Many bad things could have happened to me, but the God who knows our future had his hand on my life. I was smart and I got good grades in school. I was continually seeking approval and attention from others. I graduated high school and I went to university to study industrial design. I graduated and got a good job in Ohio where I met my husband Mike. Now here's another really beautiful part of God's hand in my life. My parents were Christians. The day we got married in a Catholic church, my mother-in-law committed to pray for my salvation. What a gift to a young girl that didn't even know God. She told me about this years later. Mike and I moved to Holland, Michigan. We both had really good careers. I don't know if you've ever been to Holland, but there's a church literally on every corner, and God was guiding us. We had sweet neighbors who invited us to church, even picked us up. We had young couples our age from church invite us to activities. God was opening doors. And then we were expecting our first child. And one night, very late, the phone rang, and it was my father's wife. He and my mom had divorced after all of us kids were out of the house, and he had remarried. She said to me, "Jill, your dad wants to talk to you." He came on the phone, and I couldn't make out his words. They were really slurred. But he said, "Jill, I love you," over and over and over. His wife got back on the phone, and in a panic I asked her what was going on. She said that he had taken too many Librium. Librium is a drug that my father would take when he was trying to dry out. You see, if he stopped drinking without the Librium, he had the DTs, the shakes, and he couldn't stop. So his doctor would prescribe Librium that would take him off of alcohol and the toxicity slowly. We found out, though, just as he had stashed fifths of whiskey all over our house, in the car, and the garage as I was growing up, he had also stashed about 30 bottles of Librium throughout his house. He had actually overdosed trying to dry out. His wife was putting him to bed that night to sleep it off, and so Mike and I went to bed. The next morning I had a very uneasy feeling and I went to work. And I tried to call my dad and I got no answer, and I tried to call his wife and I got no answer, and I tried to call my brothers and I got no answer. The next thing I know, my husband was at work and he put his arm around me. And he said, "Jill, your dad just took a gun and put it in his mouth and killed himself." The very first thought I had after the shock broke was, where is my dad? Is my dad in heaven or is my dad in hell? This question plagued me for months, for days. It burned my thoughts. I asked everyone I knew. I asked a Catholic priest. I asked my husband's parents. I asked many, many Christians that I worked with. One friend did something that changed the course of my life forever. He gave me a Bible, my very first Bible. He held it out to me one day at work, and he told me that quite honestly, he didn't know where my dad was. But he told me to read this book and that it might help with some of my questions. And I did. And I read that Bible cover to cover. And God worked his amazing plan, the plan that he had for me even in my mother's womb. And I accepted the Lord in 1990 at the age of 27. A few months later, when our son Josh was born, my husband Mike also accepted Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. and those days were beautiful. They were full of Bible studies and richness, and God blessed us 17 months later with a beautiful baby girl named Dayna. And He gifted us 15 months later, after that, with our baby boy, Justin. And then my womb was closed on doctor's orders because my uterus was ripping, and my dream of more children was taken away from me very unexpectedly. During those days, I was a career woman. My field was industrial design. I designed automotive interiors. I was only one of a handful of women designers in the world at that time. I flew all over to attend meetings with some of the best designers in the world. I attended conferences and meetings, and I had a lot of responsibilities. It was stressful, but it was really exhilarating. I was married. I had 3 beautiful children. I was active in our church's women's ministry and young girls ministry. I had a glamorous job, nice car, beautiful clothes. I was living the life. But increasingly, I had the feeling that my life was spinning out of control. I couldn't get on top of anything. When I went to work, all I thought about was the things I had to do at home. When I was at home, I thought about all the things I had to do at work. When I played with my children, I was thinking about my church responsibilities. When I was at church, I was thinking about what kind of mother I was. And then it hit. I'm really embarrassed to share this with you. I'm ashamed of this moment in my life. I had our children in daycare. Our oldest Josh was in preschool. 3 of us parents took turns driving our preschoolers to work, to school, and back. And one day it was my turn. So I dropped those 3 adorable 4-year-olds off at school and went into work. It was about 4:30 in the afternoon when I received a phone call. Someone had tracked me down in a very important meeting. The minute I saw the look on our secretary's face, I knew what had happened. I'd forgotten the kids. I forgot my son. I was 1.5 hours late to pick them up. There were multiple messages from the moms when I grabbed my purse and ran out of work, sobbing. I sobbed all the way to the school. I grabbed my Josh and the other 2 children and I delivered them to their worried mamas. I cried and I begged their forgiveness. I cried all the way home. I cried all night long. I hugged my 3 little ones extra tight and I prayed. And I thank God for the privilege of being mama to the 3 little ones that He had entrusted to me. And after I tucked them into bed, I spent a lot of time in the Word. God led me to this verse that I claimed from Matthew 11:28-30. I went to my husband and I shared that the Lord had given me peace. I knew what I had to do, and that next day I resigned from my job. I was suddenly a full-time mama, and I had more peace than I ever thought I would. My heart and my soul were full. I don't share this to condemn working moms. If I loved my job, and if I could have found a way to balance my career and my home life, I would have. I'd probably still be doing it, but it wasn't for me. And God convicts each one of us of what He expects us to do, and if we're in tune and listening to His will for our lives. My sin was a sin of pride. My sin was not that I worked. It was my pride. We went from 2 salaries to 1, sacrificed and budgeted and penny pinched, and at that time God placed a couple of homeschool moms in my path. And the Lord directed Mike and I in this direction, and I was gifted with a new and fulfilling career of being able to stay home and teach my children. Those years I'll always look back as the best years of my life. I never knew marriage could be so beautiful. I hadn't grown up knowing what a healthy marriage looks like. And God had given me a kind, thoughtful, loving man. And I love being a mama more than anything. I love spending hours reading classical literature, studying the Bible, taking nature hikes, and exploring creation with our kids. I love the dress-up days, making history come alive. And I love walking through the Bible with them. We had deep conversations and we shared life. I consider those years a gift from God. If I would not have been obedient to His call in my life, I would have missed so much. My greatest pride and joy, all glory to God, are our adult children, who are all walking with the Lord. And now grandbabies are being born, grandbabies that have been prayed over even before we knew their names. in the world with godly moms and papas. When our children graduated one by one, I grieved. I didn't want to stop being a mama. I felt like the one thing in the world that I did well was be a mama. I felt like it was my calling. My life felt hollow and empty, and I had no purpose. I wanted a full house again, and all I heard were empty footsteps during the day and the silence when our youngest Justin started studying at community college during high school and eventually went off to university. Our house felt empty, but our family was not yet complete. God again gifted us with another child. Just this week, a friend reminded me that in our early days of homeschooling, I had begged my husband to adopt. I had always loved the idea of adoption, but Mike didn't have the same leanings, and I long ago had given up asking him. Back to April of 2008, when our children were still at home with us, our family took our first cornerstone mission trip to Casa Verde Orphanage in Guatemala. Our kids were 16, 15, and 14. This trip impacted our family greatly, and at the end of the week, our children asked Mike if they didn't take any Christmas or birthday gifts for the fall next year, could we go back in December? We said yes, and we held them to that no gifts. And this was the beginning of our family trips to Guatemala. We've gone down every year since then, and when we were down there, there was a young 12-year-old boy who was always with us. And I love this picture of Mario because he's looking up at Mike, Dad. He attached himself to our family, and he spent every minute he could with us. The kids and Mike and I grew to love him. I was called to begin volunteering at Casa Verde, and in 2009, I became a board member soon after. My trips became frequent, and this young man started calling me Mom. It took my breath away every time he said it. One day, one of the social workers challenged me. She asked me what I was going to do about that. She saw that there was great love in our family for him, and in him for our family. Adoptions were closed, so she suggested a student visa. You see, this young man needed a family. He needed people to love him unconditionally and to accept him from who he was. He needed to see a godly dad in how he treats his children. He needed a mama to love him and believe in him and help him pursue his dreams. He needed to see a healthy marriage and family at work. This young man had extreme anger issues because of the cards that he had been dealt in life. His story is not mine to tell. It's his story. So I won't share the details with you except to say that his childhood was very, very difficult. And he was headed down the path of self-destruction. So we pursued a student visa. I researched all that had to be done. I got all the government forms, found the school, got him admitted, got all the documentation needed, got letters from senators, passport, and the last step was the visa. He pretty much had his bags packed. We went to the U.S. Embassy that day in Guatemala City, certain that he would be returning home to the States with us. But God's timing isn't necessarily our timing, and the visa was denied. I got on that plane that day without him. As I flew out of Guatemala City, and I looked over the beautiful volcano-laden country, my eyes began leaking, and they didn't stop for months. And again, I went to the Lord. Why, oh God? Why couldn't you come home with us? Why was this boy who needed a family so desperately denied? Why? And the Lord awakened this awareness in me. It was as if he said to me, because Jill, you got the school, you got the letters, you got the documentation, you did all of this, but you left me out. You prayed, but you didn't listen. You did all this in my name, but you didn't include me. Remember how I shared that my husband had never wanted to adopt? Well, he had been just going along with me and my desire at the time. But at the time, it wasn't his desire. And my ears were closed because I was determined. And I was not respecting my husband in this decision. I had pushed forward on my own, in my own will. But our God is a great God. no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. And I had peace. Amen. God's will be done. And one beautiful Saturday morning, with the sun shining in our windows, my husband woke up beside me and said, "Jill, let's go get our son." To God be the glory. God softened the heart of my husband. God opened the mind of the person handing out the visas. God provided a visa and home and a family for this young man, not me this time. It was not my will. It was the will of God. And in his glorious grace, he gave us another son. Romario's been with us over 5 years now. He came to us at age 15 in 5th grade. He is now 21, and he has graduated from high school, and he is studying electrical technologies at Lansing Community College. He knows and acknowledges God's grace and mercy in his life. To God be the glory. My work continues in the orphanage. I'm continually challenged, continually brought to my knees. I go down about 6 times a year, and I'm involved in helping to make life decisions for young people who live there. I am blessed that after 8 years, I've gained their confidence and that they come to me to pray with them and to share their ups and downs. I try to help them see and seek God in all that they do. I've seen very hard boys humbled and softened with prayer, and I've seen some walk away. It's hard work, and God is continually my strength, and as long as He allows, I'll continue to serve these vulnerable children. I'll try to be that one person that will point them to the ever-forgiving and loving cross of Jesus. You see, I was one of those kids. My past, the abuse, the alcoholism, the self-destructive behavior, the suicide, all prepared me for the service that God would call me to in the future. I understand the trauma that these kids have gone through. I was orphaned at age 27 when my father committed suicide. All of us here in this room will be orphaned when one or both of our parents dies. Many of us right here, right now, have already been orphaned. We don't tend to use this word when we refer to ourselves after our parents have died, but the reality is that we are orphans. Many of us, when we hear the word orphan, we think about children like the ones that I've shared with you in Guatemala, but we're all orphans. Adults are orphans too. The beauty is that God claims you and I as His children, and that same God claims the orphans in Guatemala. In John 14:18, Jesus says, "I will not leave you as orphans, I will come to you." Powerful words, powerful promise. He doesn't come only to comfort orphan children, but to comfort us, even as adult orphans. We're not alone in this world, our Father's with us. So I never found out that answer that I was looking for when my dad died. I don't know if he's in heaven or hell. I don't know where my father is. But I know where he'll be. I know where he still is. And I invite you all to be there too. On the back side of the song sheet on your table is